And Representative Franson, would you like to move your bill?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I move that House File 683 be re-referred to the Committee on Government Operations and Elections.
And do you also have an amendment?
Yes.
Would you like to move
Mr. Chair, I move the A1 amendment.
that? A1. Representative Franson moves the A1 amendment to her bill. Any discussion on the A1 amendment? If not, all in favor of the A1 amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
No, same sign. The amendment is approved. Representative Franson, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. First, I want to wish everybody a happy Hemp Day. And I have Phyllis, Representative Phyllis Kahn up with me as well. She has worked on this issue for many, many years, and I want her to be with me every step of the way as we move this bill through committee. So, hemp is one of the most historically versatile agricultural crops that has sadly also been one of the most historically maligned. Unfairly confused with its cousin marijuana, which I'm opposed to, for decades, hemp contains insignificant amounts of THC that compounds that renders a high. Furthermore, the federal government has now defined industrial hemp as having a THC level less than 0.3% in the 2014 Farm Bill. The guidelines in Section 7606 of the Farm Bill form the basis for this legislation. Hemp is not marijuana. Hemp cannot get you high. While they are the same species of plant, Cannabis sativa, they have vastly different uses, cultivators, and compositions, and should be considered differently, much like sweet corn and field corn. Currently, hemp products must be imported from foreign sources like Canada and China. Hemp is the only agricultural commodity restricted to import-only status. The versatility of hemp, and we've got some products that our page will pass out that you can take a look at. We've got some lotion in there and some milk and some bread and all kinds of goodies for you to see exactly what hemp can be turned into. Hemp has literally thousands of applications in modern day life. Consumer products derived from the hemp plant fall into two broad categories. Those deriving from the seed, those derived from the fiber or stalks, and from the seed, food, animals, feeds, biofuels, solvents, cosmetics, and plants. The hemp seed is nutritious, rich in omega-3s and protein. Fiber stalks can be turned into clothing, cordage, biocompounds, paper, fiberboard, insulation, packaging products, and even concrete and other construction materials. Simply put, this bill authorizes the Minnesota Department of Agriculture to conduct a pilot program to study the growth, cultivation, and marketing of industrial hemp, consistent with the federal guidelines established in last year's Farm Bill. This limited scale pilot will provide valuable information going forward. Producing hemp in Minnesota has the potential to create a host of jobs, both on the agricultural production side as well as processing and manufacturing jobs. During the Second World War II, Minnesota was one of the largest producers of domestic hemp for the war effort. In fact, I read a newspaper from the Winona, Minnesota from 1937 touting two hemp manufacturing facilities established there and the many jobs they supported. Recent movement on the federal level gives us hope for the future. Bills are now pending to authorize the full-scale commercial production. We've lost a great deal of time and economic opportunity on hemp due to confusion, misinformation, and confounding public policy. This bill seeks to develop, on a very small scale, the foundations and information necessary in developing new opportunities and applications for hemp in Minnesota, benefiting our state and rural economies through a regulated and focused program. HF 683, the bill, authorizes the Commissioner of Ag to administer the pilot project, authorizes institutions of higher education to participate, permits the establishment of rules consistent with federal guidelines, and defines hemp as an agricultural crop in Minnesota. This also allows the Commissioner to establish fees and enforcement of the chapter and defines industrial hemp as having not more than 0.3% THC. I ask members for their support. And Representative Khan, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I'm very pleased.
Representative, could you identify
Yes.
yourself for the record, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Phyllis Khan. I'm very pleased to join Representative Franson in this effort, and I think the person we most have to thank for why we've been able to come this far is my good friend, Senator Mitch McConnell in the U.S. Senate, who is, I think, the person responsible for getting the liberalization into the Farm Bill, last year's Farm Bill. And because of his effort, Kentucky has moved way ahead of Minnesota. But we have people who are particularly willing to supply hemp seeds to Kentucky, and it's time for Minnesota to move to catch up. And I'm very grateful to Representative Franson for taking on this issue at this time.
Representative Franson, just a quick question. You passed around a number of articles and products. Are these all available here in Minnesota stores?
That is correct, Representative Paul Anderson. These are all available here in Minnesota. However, we have to actually import the product from elsewhere because we are unable legally to grow hemp in the state of Minnesota.
Are they processed or made here in Minnesota?
No, they are not.
Okay. Okay. Any questions from members? Representative Chair Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the testifiers, what happens, I believe there's a licensing component to this. What happens if a person grows it and they're not licensed?
That is correct.
Representative Franson.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Representative, forgot your name. Hamilton. So excited.
It's the hemp.
First, before I answer your question, I just want to thank you, too, for the efforts that you have put into this bill in the past as well, Representative Hamilton. So to your question, Section 5.28 to 5.30 addresses your concern. If somebody is growing hemp that is not licensed, would be guilty of a misdemeanor. On Section 6.3 to 6.4, if they are growing marijuana, they are going to be prosecuted under federal law. And a marijuana grower does not want their crop anywhere near a hemp field because it will render their marijuana crop useless.
Chair Hamilton. Representative Khan.
I just wanted to make an addition to that. Apparently, after Colorado did its legalization of marijuana along with hemp, one of the first fields had $1 million crop totally ruined because of its proximity to an industrial hemp, which had been growing in Colorado for some time. And genetically, one of the arguments we used to have is that people are going to hide the real stuff, this stuff around it, and what that does is ruin both crops.
Representative Nornis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And can I take this home? This is the moisturizer, and I notice it's distributed out of Texas. I don't know if that's where it's actually manufactured, but it's in Texas. Directions say smooth generously over your entire body daily. We need a bigger container than this one.
But not during committee, Representative. Representative Franson, there's mainly federal law. Does federal law distinguish between marijuana and industrial hemp?
Yes, it does.
Okay,
It is clearly written.
okay.
And we do have some testifiers as well.
Okay.
Chair.
Questions from committee members? If not, any testifiers from the audience? Okay. Good morning, and identify yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Tom Peterson. I represent the Minnesota Farmers Union. We strongly support House File 683, and which you've heard a lot about, and worked on this bill. I think all 13 years I've been with Farmers Union, and always have seen a lot of support for it in the countryside. You know, farmers will always tell you, a lot of the older farmers and people in the towns you represent can tell you where the hemp factories were during World War II, and they made rope and all kinds of fibers that were important. But as Representative Franson said, I think a real game changer and a real surprise for us was the language that was in the Farm Bill that is going to allow us to move forward with this. So we see other states as Kentucky, Colorado, Washington really picking up the ball and moving forward with this. A couple of points I wanted to make, and you've heard all the things that it's used for. Over the time that I've been working on this, now I see it also, the harvesting has gotten a lot easier, and a lot of people are even looking at it for animal feed and also for animal bedding, which I think is really interesting. Just a couple of things I think is always interesting for the Ag Committee to consider is that hemp grows very similar to corn, 100 to 110 days, but it uses very low inputs. So very low pesticides, fertilizers. It generally does not need as much water to grow to maturity. Hemp is generally combined and baled, or a lot of people now are chopping hemp as well, which I think is kind of interesting. We see, Farmers Union sees hemp developing a couple of different ways in Minnesota. If we ever got beyond the test plot, hopefully, it would most likely be farmers who would grow it as a niche and then process it themselves, very small operations. Or you would most likely have a company, and this is what we see in other countries, would go into, say, Alexandria, and then they would contract with area farmers around Alexandria to grow it. It's not probably going to you're not going to have the factory in Alexandria and then you're going to have people in Pine City growing it or people in Mankato growing it. It's going to be around where the manufacturing is. And I think that's an interesting point, but it's really a good one. Also in Canada, I'm also interested in the numbers, because we always say is we're going to grow it everywhere if we ever had it all over. But in Canada, they grow on average 10 to 50,000 acres per year. So on average, a lot of the counties you represent grow anywhere from 100 to 300,000 acres of corn. So it's not, going to be widespread, but it will be an interesting market for people that want to look at that. In closing, just a couple other quick comments. I really feel, in looking at Colorado and Washington, visiting with our farmers unions in other states, that the pilot projects are really important, because looking at seed availability has been a real issue, soils, and things like that it grows. We're also working on the federal legislation that would take this to the next level, which is authored by Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell. And appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Peterson, you mentioned the acreage in Canada, about 10 to 50,000 acres. So does that sufficiently fill the market demand for the product in Canada, would you estimate?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think it's kind of interesting. I actually haven't talked to him this year, but 2 years ago when we had this bill before the committee, I actually called a couple of farmers I was put in touch with in Canada, and they said it's real spotty, on the market, and it's still a new industry. It's still, 10, 12 years old, and so they're still trying to figure out how not to overproduce, and some years they have extras that they didn't grow, and other years they don't have enough. So because it's still kind of a new industry, they're trying to find the good spot for how much acres to grow.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members? Chair Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And is there, how difficult would it be to get a manufacturing plant up and running? Is it something where we have existing plants that could do a retrofit or whatever? Or will there be I guess what I'm asking is if we are able to grow it tomorrow, do we have a market for it?
Mr. Peterson.
Mr. Chair, I'm not an expert on that, but I you know, in the research and different meetings I've been at, I know in Kentucky that there, you know, from what I've seen, there's all kinds of companies looking at that. One of the interesting things I know, and I met a person who's looking at concrete, or they call it hempcrete, and that is a really big developing in other nations where concrete's a huge carbon emitter, but made with hemp, it is really important. And so it'll depend, because if you're using it for livestock feed or biofuels, might be quicker than other things. And but I know there's a lot of, you know, the interesting point about this issue, it gets down to our members, is they are making these products, you know, around a lot in Canada. Canada's major export is to the United States. So we're not growing it, but we're buying their stuff. So.
Mr. Peterson, I had raised a question back when the university study was heard here in committee and asked about the possibility of industrial hemp becoming a noxious weed again, like it, I guess, was at one point. Do you have any experience talking with growers in Canada or any other place that could that become a problem with widespread cultivation of this as a crop?
Mr. Chair, that's also one of the questions I've had, you know, in trying to look at this and trying to visit with people. Because a lot of you will even say, I talked to a farmer about this in Todd County, who they, you know, and around people will still say there's strands of it in Minnesota from when we had it years ago, and it just reseeds itself every year. Some of you have probably seen it in your fields. And it was on the noxious weed list in Minnesota until a few years ago, and it was taken off it because it was deemed not to be a problem. And I would guess, just like any other thing, if it's not controlled and it's not kept on top of, it could spread and could be an issue. But in Minnesota, you know, I think the farmers are able to control it. And I think that's also why the test plots and the pilot is important, and that would be one thing we would want to look at in those pilots. So good question.
Representative Khan.
Well, this is, Mr. Chairman, this is a story from a long time ago, but I did find some growing on the St. Paul campus, agricultural campus at one point, I think right next to the Dean's building. So.
Okay. Anybody else wish to testify either for or against the bill? If not, Representative Franson, do you have any closing comments on your bill?
No, it's a good bill. I hope everybody votes yes on it. And once again, happy Hemp Day.
Representative Franson renews her motion that House File 683 as amended be re-referred to the Committee on Government Operations and Elections. All those in favor of passage say aye. Aye. All opposed, same side. The motion passes. Congratulations.